convos with Professor Alma Harris and Dr. Lyn Sharratt. How are you both this evening? It's evening for me, but it's early morning for Lyn.
We're terrific. I'm terrific. It's early and chilly here in Canada. And I'm really glad.
And Alma, what time is it over there?
It's 11:30 in the morning in sunny Wales, which is quite frankly not so sunny this morning.
Okay, so let's get started because we're talking about teacher leaders today. Wanting to start with what is your definition, or what is accepted as a definition for teacher leaders? Alma, do you want to start off?
Well, I mean, my first thought is, in order to define teacher leadership, you've got to define leadership. And therefore, if you think about leadership as influence, then it's about teacher influence. And that could be a formal position in a school, like a coach or a Key Stage 3 coordinator here, or it can be an informal position where someone's really influencing other teachers pedagogically. So I think teacher leadership is a broad definition, but I think if you get close to it, if you think about it as the influence, and everyone has influence, different spheres of influence in the school, but distinguishing between the formal teacher leaders, the middle leaders, coordinators, coaches, vis-a-vis other leaders who are teachers in the organization.
I love that idea of influence. I think that's the key word here. And it might not be a formal position as in part of your role description, or it can be just one that you're working within and outside of your classroom.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, sorry, if I can just add, I think what distinguishes the teacher leader in their various sort of manifestations is the closeness to practice and the impact upon pedagogy and practice. I mean, teacher leadership is not a characteristic, it's not a feature. Teacher leadership is practice. And I think if we remember those two things, influence and practice, and close to practice leadership, then I think we're in the right sort of ballpark when we talk about teacher leaders in their broader sense.
And for me, I just want to build on that solid idea of practice. And when I work with leaders and with teachers, I call both knowledgeable others. We're always striving to be knowledgeable others and have that skill in practice. And for me, a knowledgeable other is a person who is consciously skilled. So has strong interpersonal skills and also is consciously skilled, meaning that they can articulate why they're doing what they're doing. And through that research they continually do, they can clearly articulate what's working. So alongside influence and working alongside, always investigating practice with colleagues.
Because we've heard a lot of different terms used. Leaders of learning, coaches, mentor coaches, master teachers is another one. So should we worry about the actual title, or is it more the actions and the outcomes that we should be more concerned about?
Yeah, for me, I just use the term knowledgeable other, because there are so many different names. And you can have many knowledgeable others in a school or in a region, in a district. You don't have to have just one per school.
I mean, my own view on this is I'm not really concerned with what you call these people. I'm more concerned with the practice, what they actually do. I mean, there are many labels for leadership, and we can give many sort of, formal titles to people. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, it's the practice that matters more than the title. It's how these teachers engage with other teachers, how they model their practice, how they influence others. So there's an impact at the classroom level. And that's what makes the teacher leadership part so different from what I call the formal leadership in the school, because this is at the grassroots level. This is where, to be honest, the action happens closest to the classroom. So these teacher leaders in all their different guises, whatever we call them, are influencing other teachers so that the practice in the classroom improves.
And it's funny because I've never really thought about the term teacher leader until I was thinking last night, when was the first time I heard it? And it was back in 2015. Alma, you were with us at the ASIL conference, and I won the Keith Tronk Award, which was Outstanding Teacher Leader. And I read what somebody had written about me, and it was all about influence, working with teachers, building others' capacity. But I never actually looked at that term teacher leader and thought, what does that mean? I just looked at the actions in which that I received the award for. So it was something that I haven't really thought about. But then we have all these different terms, but there's so many people who really want to be involved in this area. Can you both share what you think are the skills that would really fit the criteria for a teacher leader or knowledgeable other?
So for me, it's being respected and respectful, working alongside, as I mentioned. It's also about commitment to high expectations of self and others, particularly focused on students. And I think it's the skill of being open, to having an open to learning stance, so that clear communication, being certainly in the present in the classroom, and using gradual relief, modeling, sharing, guiding.
I was hearing a lot of that emotional intelligence too, that's just as important, having that trust, having those interpersonal skills as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. Alma?
For me, I mean, when you talk about skills, it's almost like you start to think of a job description, and I guess I'm a bit wary of that, saying, oh, it's got to have this particular skill or that particular. I think it's more about capability than skills. And it's basically saying, as a teacher leader, what am I capable of doing? And what am I capable of doing with others? And that capability, I mean, ultimately these teacher leaders have got to be very pedagogically capable, because that's what they're modeling to others. That's what they're sharing. They've got to be able to collaborate in order to get the work done. And I think, okay, they need the usual skill set of empathy and understanding, but fundamentally, if they don't have the pedagogical content knowledge, to use Schulman's term, if they don't understand learning and teaching in its rawest sense, then they won't be able to influence others in the way that you hope teacher leadership will influence others for the better. So for me, it's about capability, it's about timing, it's about a set of interpersonal skills, absolutely, but more importantly, it's about that knowledge of learning and teaching that can be shared with others, so that that whole endeavor improves right across the school.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that one of the characteristics, if you will, as opposed to skills, would be that they have modeled that they're ongoing learners. So very humble and learning alongside with teachers. So they don't have all the answers. They see themselves as learners, as researchers, and inquirers after best practice, together with other teachers.
So it's a reciprocal learning between the two of them, based on trust.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that it would be
I think we've lost the connection somehow.
Yes. Andrea, are you there? Alma, I wonder if our audience can hear us. There we are.
There we go.
Okay.
We're back. We're back.
You're back in the room.
So, did you hear my question then? Do you think do you think it's good to have
I know we're going to get to this question soon.
I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about, Lyn, is, not just the criteria for teacher leaders, but also the conditions within the organization, whether teacher leaders, the key thing is not the teacher leader, it's not about them, it's about what they can do for others. And it's almost that sense of, what opportunities could your leadership bring for others? And I think it's that, and in a sense, the teacher leader has to be quite selfless in the mentoring, coaching, support, modeling processes that they bring to others, so that not everybody can be a teacher leader. I mean, by definition, of course, everyone is a teacher leader because they're influencing others, but in the formal sense, where they bring the knowledge base to other teachers and they engage with other teachers, not everybody has the right set of skills or the capability to be able to do that. So there's a fine line between knowing that you've got the pedagogical understanding to help others, but also knowing that perhaps you don't have the interpersonal skills to be able to communicate that. So it's a very fine balance.
Yeah. Yes, and I liked what you said about the organization, that we really need to think about the operational issues that underpin teacher leadership. And one of them, of course, is understanding that teacher leaders, knowledgeable others, need time during the day to work alongside, to do that gradual release. They also need to be supported by our principals and school leadership teams to have the facilitation skills. I know not everyone has the facilitation skills as well as the time. So there are conditions that the organization sets or the school sets to make this position worthwhile and valuable. So it's a whole school approach to embedding knowledgeable others in every in every formal professional learning opportunity.
And in a sense, I talk a lot about distributed leadership. Well, teacher leadership is distributed leadership writ large. And I guess what we know about distributed leadership is that cannot happen in a school without the formal leaders of that organization, the principal, the deputy principal, actually encouraging that and allowing that to happen. So there's the irony that you can't have, informal leaders without the formal leadership supporting. So one of the things I reflect on is not every school will be ready or prepared for teacher leadership in the way that I'm thinking about it as an organizational resource to build organizational capacity. And that really, as a sophisticated form of leadership, because it involves the many rather than the few, you really have to have high levels of trust, a high degree of clarity, to use your term, Lyn, around what it is that they're doing. And also, that reciprocal respect, I think, for people who have taken on those formal responsibilities. Because ultimately, it's not about the role or the title. As I've said earlier, it's about the practice. So let's forget about the title and the role, and let's look at what we can do within our sphere of influence to influence others for the better in that teacher leadership role.
Yeah. And I just think that our formal leaders, our principals and our school leadership teams, as well as system leaders, know when to step up and when to step back, when to really think about devolving responsibility and accountability to our teacher leaders. So there's certainly operational issues as well as professional learning issues that are needed to embrace and embed this role, critical role. But there's a lot of underlying pieces that need to be addressed.
So it's really got to come from the executive, the principals have to really believe in this to make it work within the schools.
Because, there's a cost factor. There is a cost factor in terms of ensuring that there's time to do this alongside our teachers in classrooms. So we want to make it a value-added position to increase all students' growth and achievement.
But you see, if you look at the evidence base, and I'm not going to say too much about the academic literature, but I mean, it's important to underline that, you know, if you could do anything in a system or a school to significantly improve it, you would get your teachers to work together more effectively, more often, talking about teaching and learning. You know, and in a sense, we know the answer to system and school improvement. And I guess the work on collective efficacy speaks to that. The work on collaboration speaks to that. So we know what to do. The important point is how to do it within a school environment, and how to make it not onerous on a teacher, not replacing the classroom work that they do, but also, you know, respecting that it's about collaboration. We can all cooperate to no end, but really the skill of the teacher leader is to get teachers to collaborate purposefully and to focus that collaboration on student learning outcomes. That's the key. You know, it's not just about white noise in the system or more titles for leaders. It's the work, as you would say, Lyn. It's doing the work of changing the practice of other teachers, which is where you get that improvement.
And do you think that collaboration needs to have those shared goals then? That's where you get that support.
Well, I really appreciate Alma's work around distributed leadership. I think she clearly outlines how important it is when we're looking at system and school reform and change in practice, that we have those knowledgeable others alongside us. And it's about, unfortunately, but fortunately, the structures that drive our behavior. So if we know that embedded, knowledgeable others make a difference, then we have to understand there are going to be costs at the system level to support this and at the school level.
Okay, so just thinking at the moment with COVID affecting many people, how has this changed the role of teacher leader now, and how may it change in the future?
Well, I've given this a lot of thought. I think Alma and I both have been thinking about this in the jurisdictions in which we work. I think what's really important to know is that teacher leaders at this time are a must-have. It doesn't change the role and responsibility and the accountability we have to student learning. We still need to focus on students' work, whether it's online or offline. And there was an interesting note from the Zoom folks and their tips for effective use of Zoom. And I love the fact that in Zoom, you can share the screen, you can use the whiteboard. I think teacher leaders at this time have an opportunity to work alongside teachers, to reach out to support them in terms of parent understanding. And also, I think it's a time, as Zoom says, to work with a colleague. Zoom talks about having co-teachers, having two people run the session. So what a wonderful opportunity for teachers and teacher leaders together, even if they're social distancing and far apart, to actually co-plan, co-teach, co-debrief, and co-reflect. Our 4Cs model is really alive and well in the challenging situation we're in at the moment.
Terrific. Alma, did you want to share anything on that one? On the how do you think the roles change for a teacher leader?
I think the role has changed dramatically. I mean, I think this current pandemic has rearranged the leadership architecture in our schools and school systems. And I think teacher leaders are more important than ever before, because they are now at the front line of our education system. I mean, I know they always were, but really they are on a daily basis doing the heavy lifting around the sort of curriculum and teaching work that needs to be done. Now, I can't imagine whenever we come out of the current set of circumstances that is ever going to go back in the bottle. And in a sense, I think what it does is it gives a new legitimacy to teacher leadership, that it isn't just about the odd person taking on a role. It's about the power of teachers collectively in terms of shaping educational practices of the present and the future. So I'm of the view that, you know, we are seeing a new imperative for education that is around teacher leadership in its newest form, online and otherwise. But really, I think we're seeing a transformation of what it means to be a teacher leader.
Yeah, and I think that influence and agency at the moment, a lot of them are getting opportunities to try new things in their classroom and work collaboratively, because a lot of it's new. It's a new situation for a lot of people.
I guess I'd like to add, this is an opportunity to celebrate rural and remote schools, because they've been doing this for a very long time. They're becoming very proficient at virtual co-construction of data walls, of virtual case management meetings, and now they're able to support us as we all turn to that virtual reality. So couldn't agree more with Alma that it's a must-have, and now more than ever, to have teacher leaders on the front line.
One of the things, sorry Lynn, one of the things that I wanted to refer to is that, you know, there's quite a well-known book in both the UK and in Australia now called Flip the System. And the basic argument in the book is that the teachers should be at the forefront of educational change and improvement, because we've seen what happens when, you know, others are at the forefront of educational change and improvement. And I think what we're experiencing now is the reality of the flipped system, that for the first time, teachers are at the forefront of decision making. They are leading the system from behind their computers, from their kitchen tables. They are the system. So I'm really optimistic that we're going to see a surge, a new wave of teacher leadership that is legitimate, but is powerful and flips the system, basically.
And it's been wonderful for the teachers to get the recognition. It's, you know, now a lot of people have seen how difficult it is to be doing a whole lot of different things. So teachers do rock. We had that hashtag teachers rock. And so it's great that they're getting that recognition now.
But I'd also like to give a big shout out, I guess, to the teaching assistants in our schools, who right now they are supporting key workers in Wales and the UK. And I think it's really important to recognise, you know, the sterling work that they do in supporting the teachers and supporting the practice that's happening today. So I think when I talk about teacher leadership, I'm not just thinking about teachers, I'm thinking about the practice of others leading the teacher.
Absolutely, and here in Ontario, our teacher leaders, our teachers, all support staff are reaching out to parents to support them. And it's just so impressive to see and understand that our parents are indeed in challenging times as well. And we need to support them in this work. And there's an opportunity for all staff to do that, including our teacher leaders, walking alongside support staff and teachers.
Okay, well, we have got quite a few questions, so I might just start with one for you both from Deborah Nedelicki. What do you think about formalizing or certifying of teacher leadership? I knew this one would come up. Is it helpful or does it hinder leadership in the profession? I know we've had a discussion about this prior, but what are you thinking, Alma?
I'm just glad that I shouted out for Flip the System Australia, Deborah. Look, I think that if you over-formalise stuff, the energy goes out of it. And I think there's a place for saying what teacher leaders do at different levels. But I think certification and standards and all that brings in it's an energy zapper to what should be a creative, impromptu, dynamic set of practices that teachers engage in, either formally or informally. I've seen what happens when, you know, standards, certification, accountability, all that comes in. It just puts a stranglehold on schools and the system. So I wouldn't be a big fan of doing that, to be honest. I think I'd rather release more teachers into the system to do the very best they can, and to do the work that is clearly most important.
And that's what I was saying before, that I asked about 10 teachers who were doing a coaching and mentoring course, if they were given the same amount of money or even less money to be working with other teachers and less time in the classroom, they were all very keen on that. So to me, there is a passion for helping other, working with your colleagues, working with your peers to unlock the potential. So I'm with you, Alma. I think certification might actually strangle that enthusiasm and that passion, and that's my view. Lyn?
So I can see the pros and cons of this. Certainly in our system, we turned a corner when we provided teacher leadership roles in term positions. So they would be with us for 3 to 5, maximum 5 years. And then, so it was a rotating basis. And when I'm really studying at the moment the HALT position in Australia. So that's highly accomplished lead teachers. And the AITSL standards for teachers and principals really spell out the wonderful skills and behaviors and dispositions that highly accomplished and lead teachers need. And so I think there's a place to be really clear about what are the expectations. On the other hand, I don't see that there's just one teacher, leader, or knowledgeable other on a staff or in a system. I think we have to encourage and certainly build our teacher leadership from within. And so I don't have a position whether it's right or wrong. I just think that I appreciate the AITSL standards being very clear on the expectations. And I also know that we'll always have those informal teacher leaders who are the teachers who work beside us, who are making a difference for our students. So I'm sitting on the fence on this one. Thanks, Deb.
Can I just add that I'm not negating the work that AITSL does, or indeed the highly accomplished teacher leaders. I guess my point is about inclusivity. And as soon as you start to define, and as soon as you start to have checklists, and as soon as you start to say they're going to have these skills and these proficiencies, what you do is you exclude those people who perhaps feel that they can't reach those standards, and yet they're really highly accomplished teachers. I'm just thinking of early career teachers. Why should it be the case that they couldn't be teacher leaders? Of course they can be teacher leaders. So it's a much more inclusive model, I think.
Yeah. And I think I agree that we have to be very careful that it's not an elitist group.
Mm-hmm. I think there's nothing wrong with identifying accomplishments. I mean, we do it all the time in our systems, but I think it's about, how do you bring in that teacher leader who's got such a wealth of expertise, but maybe is slightly underconfident, or wouldn't be the person who says, choose me first, How do we, because if we're talking about capacity building, we've got to recognize that the quietest person, the less assuming person, could have the relevant expertise, just needs the opportunity to be brought in. And that probably has to be in an informal way. So I don't believe that everybody should lead in a school. I think that would create all sorts of madnesses. But I think it's about giving the opportunity to lead at the right time with the right expertise. And that's where the trick is knowing what the most important issue is and getting the right teacher leaders around it to work together on it.
Absolutely. And Alma, when we do our learning walks and talks, that's an opportunity for our principals and leadership teams to identify those who are leading in different areas. So we know our staff as well as we know our students, and what are their strengths and what are their next steps.
Okay. Is there any question there that you see? We've got quite a few questions.
Oh, I see one from George. Hi, George. Thanks for joining us. This question you ask, are dispositions more important than skills? I learned a long time ago from Carmel Cravola, bless her, that dispositions are pretty important. And I was leading our literacy coaches to have those knowledgeable skills in teaching, learning, assessment, and instruction. And Carmel said, well, that's not the most important skill. You have to have those strong interpersonal skills first. And at first I didn't listen to her, and we hired all the wrong people to be literacy coaches. And I learned that in order for our coaches and mentors to be invited into classrooms to work alongside teachers, you have to have those skills of relational trust first.
Okay, I'm going to read one from Chris Brown. Hi, Chris. I think we assume people know how to collaborate and we give lip service to this. Put them together and assume that they know how to do it. How can senior leaders best support teachers and middle leaders in learning these skills?
Go,
Alma.
I couldn't agree more with Chris. I mean, if you look at the abject failure of different forms of collaboration, whatever you want to call it, in different contexts, it's not about the professional learning community or the learning community or whatever you wish to call it. It's the fact that we make an assumption that simply putting teachers together means that they have the skills to collaborate, because, and that's not being in any way unkind to teachers, but simply to say the skills of collaboration, particularly online, are quite sophisticated. You know, so how do you move from teachers cooperating to collaborating? It's a higher order set of skills to collaborate, and to collaborate with purpose. So I agree with Chris that, you know, we probably should focus a little bit more on the nature of collaboration, the skills required, just to sort of ensure that the teachers feel comfortable with those collaborative strategies that they're using. You know, so. And of course, it doesn't just, I've said this on a public stage, you know, teachers just can't self-combust into collaboration. You know, they can't just say, well, 1 minute, you know, we're working individually and now we're going to be, you know, collaborating. And I think the importance there is about having some models of collaboration that scaffold that work together, whether it's a professional learning community or a learning team, or doesn't really matter. But the important thing, the most important thing, is the focus on the student learning. It's not about teachers feeling better about themselves. It's not a teacher therapy group. They're there to share their skills and their experiences in order to collectively make a difference to learning.
Yeah, thanks, Chris Brown, for that question. For us, it's really about co-construction. So besides the word alongside, I love the word co-construction, because we need to co-construct operating norms, how we're going to treat each other respectfully in a learning situation. It's about having templates and protocols to support teacher leaders in moving through learning sessions that's short, sharp, and shiny. And so there's a lot of, as I've mentioned, those facilitation skills needed that systems need to recognize, but also structures in place to do this work.
Terrific. I'm just looking, there was one here. In terms of policy, what changes can we introduce to give teachers the power to lead and connect with others? From Cecilia.
These are all our Twitter friends, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
I recognize all these faces. I think policy really needs to support the notion through time for ongoing professional learning sessions and training around facilitation skills.
I mean, for me, and it's a roundabout way of answering the question, it still always seems very odd to me that policy decisions are made at a distance from the people who are supposed to be delivering that policy. That's the first thing. And I think that what I've argued over the last 10 years is that the teachers need to be far closer to policy making, because they have the expertise, they have the knowledge, they have the understanding. So I guess along the flip the system lines. And that doesn't mean just tokenism. In Wales, for example, we've got a new curriculum that's been co-constructed by teachers. So it's possible, but there's got to be the willingness of policymakers to want to do that. And they get distracted by PISA and all other sorts of things. But ultimately, the best resource they have is their teaching profession. That is the best resource they have. So why not listen to those in the front line and make policies that are actually appropriate for context, rather than borrowing policies that are made elsewhere? So I think that the answer to the question, and it's not an easy thing to sort of solve, but I think the first thing has to be, you have to have teachers at the policy table. That's the first fundamental, because otherwise your policy is going to be disconnected from practice, and then that inevitably just won't work.
So I've got another question now from Rachel Lofthouse. Is it possible to be a teacher leader without using mentoring and a coaching approach?
Lyn?
No.
I mean, Rachel, that's a bit of a loaded question, Rachel, and these are all our Twitter friends, which is interesting.
Yes, yes.
If you go back to my first initial response, if teacher leadership is about influence, you've got to be able to influence others. So how do you do that? Well, coaching and mentoring are two quite powerful ways of doing it. And I guess for me, coaching is a more powerful way, although I'm not going to get into the semantics of it, because you're alongside someone. You're not directing them. You're sharing, you're encouraging, you're alongside them. And I think, we know from all the research evidence that the power of coaching, when it's done well, because it can be done badly, but when it's done well, to transform not just an individual, but their practice as well. So I agree with Lyn. It's a longer answer, but yes.
Then you talked about facilitation skills earlier. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because Chris Munro would like to know more.
Oh, that's good. Thanks, Chris. For me, it's about being an attentive listener, knowing how to hear voices around a table, whether it's PLC work or a staff meeting, how to build on the ideas of others. For me, facilitation skill is all about ensuring there's accountable talk in every conversation that begins with data. And I have a huge, a broad, I guess, understanding of data. So I'm thinking about not only hard data, statistical numbers and percentages, but also student work as data. So we have a purposeful focus, and the conversation becomes, what can we learn together? So it's facilitation skills are always focused on inquiry, an inquiry-based approach, on having an inquiry stance, but hearing every voice, building on the ideas of others, attentive listening.
Okay, we've got another question from Ibrahim. How to deal with formal leaders in a school that do not give the space for teacher to practice leadership? So we were talking about this earlier. I know it's, you've got to have that structure, that time, that support come from the leadership team or the executive team, correct?
I guess.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Alma. I'll build.
All I was going to say was that, the biggest barrier that we've got to teacher leadership working in schools and in systems is the formal leadership structures, because ultimately they can work against teacher leadership. It's a little bit like the distributed leadership idea. Then, for some leaders who are secure and understand the power of it and what it could potentially do, not every time, then it works. But for those leaders who see their role very fixed as the leader, then anything outside that becomes a potential threat. But what they've misunderstood is that if they don't release the potential of teacher leaders in their school, their chances of improvement are dramatically lessened.
Yes, absolutely. So I think teacher leaders who don't have the support of formal leadership have some ways of working. Think big, start small, working alongside one teacher. But it is very challenging.
One of the things that we haven't talked about, and I don't want to lose this point, because so far we've been talking about teacher leadership within the school, okay? And I think that's enormously powerful. But I don't want to lose the perspective that teacher leadership can also happen within networks across schools. And those points of connection may be more challenging for a whole range of reasons. But when we're talking here about organizational change, I'm talking about different forms of organizational change that include networks of different type and different nature, because they are powerful mechanisms to support teacher leadership.
Have you got any examples you can share with us on that? Where they worked across different schools?
I mean, I think that there are many examples, you know, from England and from Ontario. I think at Australia, I mean, there are lots of networks. We know that, and networks were there before teacher leadership became fashionable as a terminology. So, but all I'm trying to say is, and it's not about this network works particularly well. It's more. I'm saying that networks are a way of connecting teachers so that their leadership can be enhanced and developed. So I'm just talking about different organizational forms to support teacher leadership.
Sure. And I think the Teach Meet movement definitely brought a lot of teachers together to share their practice. And even though it's a shorter amount of time, those relationships build, and then you contact the person that you heard something about and you look for them for support.
So for example, and I give a shout out to Rachel Lofthouse, you know, Collective Ed, for example, and there are lots of these very powerful teacher-led, and that's really important, teacher-led organizations that support other teachers to be better teachers, and that's what it's all about.
And for me, just to build on that it's about school leadership and teacher leadership or knowledgeable others at the school level and at the network level, and also at the system level. And we need to remember the importance of leadership at every level, and it doesn't really work unless we have leaders who know when to step up and when to step back, but always walk alongside knowledgeable others.
So when it doesn't work, do we want to talk about that? Because situations, things happen within schools, contexts are all different. What would be some of the things we need to have in place so that we have more success?
Well, no, I don't want to talk about when it doesn't work. Because it's so powerful, we have to really understand those operational issues that make it work. One of the things I've learned is that these term positions really help us select many people on a rotating basis. So where at the system level, at the network level, and at the school level, we're giving multiple opportunities for teachers to step up and really share their expertise. So for me, it's all about parameter number one. It works when we have a focus on students. We believe all students can learn, but we also believe that all teachers can teach. And we have a responsibility to build that capacity for all teachers. So it works when we have these term positions that give multiple opportunities for teachers to lead and learn together.
And Lyn, can I ask then, how long would that term be?
Yeah, so ours are 3 years, and then renegotiable in terms of an additional 2 years. So it's always evolving and staggering, so we don't have everyone changing the position at the same time. I think 3 years, you get into the position and figure out what you're doing in the first year. You really make a difference in the second year, and in the third year, you're looking around to see what's next. So I think extending that 5 years is really profitable for the system and the school and the knowledgeable other. So rotating terms really work, and we want to have as many knowledgeable others exposed to being leaders as possible. So to me, the ultimate goal is every teacher is a knowledgeable other who knows how to teach all students. And that for me is the crux of why it works, because students are in the center. Student work is the data to put faces on an assessment and instruction.
I know that we don't want to talk about the downsides of this, but I think that the reality is that there probably are some. There is a dark side to leadership, and there's a dark side to teacher leadership in the respect that sometimes it just doesn't work. The personality, the capability, the competence just isn't there. So I think what I'm trying to get away from is everybody sort of takes a normative view of teacher leadership and says, oh, you know, it must be a jolly good thing. And normally it is, but that doesn't mean it always is. So there has to be a careful orchestration of the teacher leadership positions. There has to be some review, you know, and not a sort of mechanistic approach to it, but I think we have to be honest. Collaboration doesn't always work, right? Some teacher leaders will be less effective than others. So we have to recognize that this is not a panacea. It's not a revolution, it's an evolution. And I think we just got to be realistic about what teachers can do. And we'd love all teachers to be fabulous teacher leaders, but the reality is, you know, that some are more able than others to do that work right now, which is why those networks that I talk about are so important, because they connect teachers in different contexts together and raise the bar a little bit. But I think we shouldn't be drawn into the conclusion that, you know, teacher leadership is a wonderful thing. Like anything, it depends on the context, the circumstances, and the individuals involved.
So I'm just going to ask a question from Paul Campbell in Hong Kong. Can these principles really be applied across all systems in the world? How do we know, and how can we be sure that the teacher leadership would have the same influence or impact the world over? But we're just talking about context, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I've lost it. Almost.
Okay. The answer is, Paul, we can't know, because not everything works everywhere, but some things work in certain contexts, right? So yeah. If you think about it, you know, there are no guarantees when you talk about, you know, something working globally. I mean, that is a proposition that we just can't support. Things work unevenly. What we know is that things that are transferred from different contexts are less likely to work. So I think the teacher leadership movement is not something imposed from Canada or the UK or Australia onto Hong Kong. You know, we have seen in Hong Kong probably the largest demonstration of people leadership ever. And that wasn't imposed on the system, that evolved from the system through a set of needs. So I'm a great believer in saying, look at your context, look at the challenges in your own education system. Don't borrow anything from elsewhere because it's unlikely to work. But think about what are the best practices that you see around the world. Let's borrow the practices, not the policies.
And I couldn't agree more. I'd like to add to what Alma's saying, Paul, and that is, I don't think the work starts with teacher leaders. I think the work starts with all of us having a shared belief and understanding. And And when that happens, and we do believe, I think it works everywhere to really unpack, do we really believe all students can learn? Do we really believe all teachers can teach? Do we have high expectations? Do we understand that it's about ongoing prevention and intervention? And finally, can all of us clearly articulate why we're doing excuse me, what we're doing? So that parameter number one, I think, is a global vision that we all need to have to begin the work and also continue to investigate those beliefs and understandings. Because when we do all sit in a room and really, truly believe all students can learn, then we have that shared responsibility and accountability. So I think it starts with that vision of shared beliefs and understandings.
Terrific. We've got so many questions here. I'm just going through them. Do you think, this is from Len Nixon, do you think leaders of learning embrace servant leadership dispositions and behaviours?
Can you say that again, Andrea, slowly?
Do you think leaders of learning embrace servant leadership dispositions and behaviours?
Well, I would say they certainly need to be servant leaders, see themselves as followers as well as leaders. And we've said many times, working alongside. So servant leadership, Sergio Vanni, I remember a long time ago saying that really the mark of a leader is how many leaders we leave behind. So for us in all of our positions, I think Philip Schlechte said, our work is to develop other leaders. So to me, that's about servant leadership, that we're there to serve and honor our. So it goes back again to that shared belief and understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I think that,
Yep,
Ken Leithwood, of which most people will know his work on transformational leadership, you know, he talks about the work of teacher leaders as being leadership without ego. In other words, it isn't about you. It was never about you. It's always about what you can do for others. So in that respect, it is a form of servant leadership. I mean, I think the danger is we get strung up with these different labels for leadership. And I'd like to sort of return to what is the leadership practice? What is the set of practices that the teacher leaders have? And how do they enact them in their context? And one of the things, to come back to the question from Hong Kong, is, you know, none of this is without risk. You know, this is not a blueprint. It's a case of trial and error. And what works in one place won't work in another. So I think we have to recognize the teacher leaders also have to be, at some level, risk takers to do things differently, to change things. Otherwise, they're just maintaining the system.
And you know, I love the work of Ken Leithwood. He is definitely my mentor, and I really appreciate that transformational leadership, those dimensions, those 8 dimensions, Alma. And one of the hardest to unpack is creating that culture of learning in every one of our settings. So servant leadership is really about creating those conditions for us to learn together in a culture that encourages that risk-taking, that fail-fast attitude.
Okay, the next question is from Tony Glover. Outside any formal teacher leader role, would you see that it should be a priority that all teachers at every level have the empowerment to adopt a leadership approach, even new entrants? Isn't it a major role of formal leaders to facilitate this?
Oh, nice to hear from you, Tony. I certainly think it is a responsibility to really think about what's it look like in a school, in a network, in a system, when we encourage all teachers, new entrants to teach, new beginning teachers, initial teaching, And I guess I would say that what is important in that is, again, developing that culture that's very accepting, very forgiving.
I mean, here's nice to hear from you, Tony. Here's the strange thing. If you can imagine a different profession, and you said to someone, come into this profession, but then you're going to have to wait 10 or 15 years to get a leadership role, even though you're competent, even though you're able to just hang around for a bit and wait. That would seem very strange. But somehow in education, we get people to wait to be leaders. And I think we have to change that conception. You know, from the moment a newly qualified teacher steps into a school, they are a potential leader of something. And I think it's incumbent on the formal leadership within the organization to provide opportunities for those people to develop their leadership abilities. You know, how do you develop your leadership skills and practices if no one gives you a chance to lead? So I think infused right across the professional learning platform has to be this notion that leadership is a right, an entitlement, and everybody's got the ability to influence. Doesn't matter whether you're NQT or whether you're later on in your career. So I think the problem here is the word leader gets in the way because it conjures up all sorts of roles and responsibilities. But think more about leadership and the practice, and it frees you up from all that. And of course, NQTs can be leaders within their sphere of influence.
I just thinking about that, Alma, I also think that all colleagues, so other teachers in schools, need to see colleagues as capable in many different areas. And for me, it's dispelling that tall poppy syndrome. We have that here. I think we have that across the globe, that you can't possibly be a teacher leader if you're a beginning teacher. And I think all of us as colleagues have to have that growth mindset, that we're looking at leadership, as you say, as opposed to that formal position. And any of our teachers can assume those roles if we are open-minded about it.
Okay, I'm going to do one more question from Michelle Daly. How can we build leadership capacity in others with the aim of improving educational attainment in disadvantaged areas?
This is a really complex question, because it brings in a whole range of different things. I mean, what we know, you know, my work on schools in challenging circumstances, disadvantaged contexts, you know, I feel very passionate about those schools and about those contexts, because it's harder to make changes in areas where children are in poverty. And there are a lot of areas in Australia and Canada and the UK where children are living in abject poverty, and schools are located right in those communities. What we know is that in those contexts, leadership matters more than ever, because there's not the social capital flying around. There's not the resources, perhaps, that other schools might have. So that means that teacher leadership also matters a great deal in those settings. Because if you're trying to build the capacity for those schools to improve, and recognizing the challenges that they face, and some of them can't be addressed by the school alone, it's by the community that these will be addressed. You know, we have to recognize that we need to use every little bit of skill, will, and persistence that exists within the school in those contexts, because there isn't any spare. So my argument would be, and the research would uphold this, is that leadership at all levels in those schools matters incredibly much.
Absolutely. And you know, we continue to find solutions to this challenging area. And I don't think there's one solution to this. Leadership matters, context matters, and for us our school communities matter. So who are the parents and our community partners, and how do we make our schools hub schools where our partners and community parents, community members can come in and work alongside us. So to me, there's no easy answer. It's kind of a little bit of this and lots of that. Some are necessary to really make a difference. But to us, hub schools where parents and community members can come in and work alongside us really matter as well.
Well, that is our hour up this evening, or evening for me. So I want to thank you, Professor Alma Harris and Dr. Lyn Sharratt, for joining us today on Teacher Leaders, a must-have. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Next week, we have Dr. Paul Browning and Margaret Barr, and they're going to be talking about the importance of trust. So please join us next week and have a great week.
So much. Thanks, Alma.
Thanks. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.